Yeah, so I think we should get going. We'll have a couple of additional people join us, and I know about some of you will join us as well, but welcome everybody. Thank you for finding this place, and a lot more spacious than some of our other past meetings. So we will be here for the next meeting, and then we will be back in during 101 for the final 2 months. And basically the bulk of the day, the bulk of the 3 hours, will really be walking through these draft recommendations and speaking about them in as much detail as possible. But everyone hear whether they feel like they're on track or not, if they just either jettison or change dramatically. No pride of authorship whatsoever. So if it doesn't land right, you have to change it. And you may have seen, if you were on your computer this morning, an incorrect version and a corrected version of a document that provided feedback from the Dairy Farmers of America on their reaction to a number of questions posed by the committee to opioids about, the needs of the dairy processing sector in Maine. If you're in the room, those documents are in front of you at the back of the packet. If you're online and you're part of the task force, they were emailed to you. And public members, if you're on the interested parties list, hopefully you received them as well. If you didn't, if you want to raise your hand and we can try and figure that out in real time. We will probably get to that sort of as part of the conversation about the recommendations, those that have to do with processing. So, and if you just, if the task force members just feel like you don't have, you didn't either have time to look at it this morning because it came probably when you were traveling, we can certainly add this to the agenda for the next as well. So as you would need. And I think we have Commissioner Beal now online. So, Commissioner, anything that you want to add before we kick off? We were gonna dive into the recommendations.
No, I think we've got a lot of ground to cover today, so I'd say just jump right in. And apologies, I'm going to be on and off camera a little bit, driving and making my way through security at the airport at some point in time.
Thanks for joining. A reminder that I always include the working agreement, and as we are starting to move toward recommendation development, just want to point out this concept about how to reach conclusion around the recommendations that will be driving for consensus through a facilitated discussion-based process. We don't intend to hold votes, and in an ideal world, we'd end up with a consensus report because those are typically more have more punch, for legislators. But if there's a very strong dissenting opinion about something, and that 2 groups of individuals feel like we want to get both sort of opposing views put into the report, we can certainly entertain that as well. So any questions before that? I always put public input in there somewhere, but if you want to get public input a little bit earlier on in the day to have the public's perspective factored into your thinking, we can move that as well. Okay. All right. Well, let's jump right in. Maybe we'll start at a high level and get general reactions about whether when you read the draft recommendations in total, whether you felt like, yeah, this is, this captures the breadth of what we're talking about, or there were major omissions that you were really surprised were not in there. Just kind of general reactions so we have a sense of how far off we are.
Starting with the first subgroup.
No, any part of this, or yeah, no, I guess so. No, I mean any part of it. Sorry, any part of it.
I have lots of thoughts, but I don't know, if people want me to just kick it off and then,
If they're highly specific, we'll go one by one.
Yeah.
And we'll start with the tier program, but I think right at the start, I was just trying to get a sense of, you know, did this feel like it was on target or pretty far apart?
I mean, I
Take
think
the temperature.
it's that having been at least part of all of the subgroups at one point or another. I think it touched on everything that was covered within all the subgroups. My question, I guess, is do we want to prioritize within our recommendations? Is that something we think we'd like to do? Like high priority, because I think there's sort of a lack of direction. And I don't know that there's a real way for action. And at least I would like to see something that, you know, our legislative body could take from this and actually put into, you know, policy or work.
Yep,
And I think that would be helpful for that.
sure. Okay, great.
My only concern of this is that we're talking about things around the farmer, but nothing about the farmers themselves. One of the things that's come up repeatedly on the organic side is the lack of reasonably priced feed. That if one of your basic quality ingredients is 4 times anybody else's, where in the heck are you gonna go?
Any other general thoughts?
As far as that point goes, I don't know. If there's a lot that state can do about that, except. Thinking about businesses. Or transportation in the state of Maine. Like, why I brought that up was because of what some of the DFA comments were. They had some thoughts about whether it's regulations on trucking or roadways or infrastructure that they might be able to apply for grants that would help them, the company, be more stable in Maine. That's something that could apply to a company like that. I don't know, but that's.
Mhm. The difficult thing is that small farmers who are off the beaten path really are subjected to either excess fees or skipping them because it's just too costly. I mean, my milk pickup route was 1,200 miles. Not sustainable. So I like to. I've been thinking through this thing as we've been going on through things. One of the things that it really gets down to is I agree that dairy is the critical one right now. There's no doubt in my mind, if we don't do something, we're not going to have to worry about the dairy industry because there won't be one. Some of the extra large folks will be able to survive because they can produce enough milk. But a lot of the younger and smaller folks are just not going to make it. So in my mind, this problem is really about Maine, by definition, is always going to have small farms. Our largest farm is a small farm in the great outdoors. I mean, I happened to manage an operation at one point in time that 120,000 acres of iceberg lettuce in California. And that was a small operation out there. So to me, I think what we need to be able to do, and dairy is a great place to start, is make Maine the home of the small farmer and actually develop our brand around that concept. That if you want local small farms supported anywhere in New England, bring your family up to Maine, settle down, and we'll find a way to get you in.
just have one clarification on that, and that is for us to keep in mind that all Maine farms are small farms in the greater milk shed. We are, you know, we do know that it is more challenging for sole proprietors, and to, you know, who don't necessarily have employees or have, you know, a lot of the, or are in a more remote location, it's more challenging. But I think all of our farms are facing the whole thing. We can very easily package Maine as the home for small farmer or as the home for family farms, considering all but 3 of our farms are family owned and operated. And the 3 that aren't are nonprofits. So, you know, we have, those are pretty nice percentages in term, from a marketing perspective.
Okay. All good thoughts? Let's dive in and get into the meat of this and get your reaction. So you'll note, you noted that in the email that I sent out, I noted that I tried to sort of add a little bit more narrative to the tier program and to the other ones. So comments on that one.
I thought adding narrative is incredibly important. We need to make sure that we have those taglines that legislators can share with each other, that will kind of sum up. So that, it was a great start. I've got a whole list of other infrastructure folks that we can add. You had a broader list. So, and from haulers, fuel and energy suppliers, and bankers, insurance, accounting, municipalities. I'll provide you the one thing, there are 2 big things in the tier that I wanted to bring up. One is that we should make sure we put in the narrative that these dairy farms are also employers and small businesses. So they tick the category of not just farms and agriculture, but they fall in some of these other categories. And which means that hopefully when the legislators are creating programs for small businesses, they will be mindful that farms also need, you know, it would be helpful for them in these categories. And then the other issue, when you talked about, and I'm not disagreeing with the proposal that the dairy task force strongly recommended, I would say ongoing, full funding the tier program to the short run break even. There's gonna be a challenge inherent in the way the financing is now, and that is because of the requirement for a balanced budget every year. There's almost no way that we're gonna get around having it be a point of debate in the appropriation side. So one of my recommendations is that maybe appropriations be included on a routine basis when the cost of production reports come. So that way, everybody who is weighing in on tier funding is getting the big picture and getting the official picture. So, you know, that's one mechanics. And then the other thing is, if we do want to protect some funding, we already have, it's kind of like a dedicated account that we put the Oxford Casino money in. It's actually run through the Note pool, which could get a little messy. It might be nice to have its own, but we already have that system, and it's understood that that money is kind of definitely off limits for other uses. So maybe that's a line that we should pursue about maybe putting a baseline in there every year, and that could be, that money could be rolled over. And then if that's in there, that puts a static number in the budget, That'll make the budget people relatively happy, and then based on predictions, it will be whether or not we think we have to add more to the requirement. It's just it's gonna shrink the extra that might have to be discussed and debated every year in the budget. So I don't know.
Understood. Okay, that's helpful. Helpful details.
In the trenches and.
Others' perspectives on other details that came up for you about the tier?
I guess I would like to just. Some point, doesn't have to be at this meeting, to pursue the looking at a bond issue. To support sustainable food and milk and dairy in the state of Maine. I don't know, to help fund the TIP program. I don't know if that's something that we could pursue in the next few meetings, is take a look at and see.
Yes.
Where the support would be, because I know there is huge support out there for local. Food, and if dairy is. On the way out in the state of Maine without any help from the government, then on the state of Maine. This may be something that would entice people to help with local food.
Sure, yeah, no, thank you for that. We will talk about the idea of a dairy fund today. That is one of the draft recommendations of the meeting. At the last meeting, you know, there was a little bit of discussion around, is the concept of a dairy bond for other items that are not the tier program, so as not to create the risk that you would lose that certainty of funding, or is it, you know, I think Representative Cooper, who's on the line, was also saying, you know, absolutely in an ideal world, nothing changes in terms of the financing structure of the tier program unless it were to increase, but it's always good to have alternative plans as well, and so if necessary backup plan for the tier program. That could be one avenue, or that it be a source of funding to support different initiatives that are built into the recommendations, but we will definitely touch on this. So, you know, I think just getting all of your views on the thinking behind and the structure of a bond will be important. Other thoughts on what was here for a description of a tier recommendation?
I think it's very well known that the tier program is, as Annie mentioned earlier, it would be a good idea to prioritize things. And I think it's well known that the tier program needs to be right at the top. That will be really important to keep the dairy industry strong in Maine. But it hit me a little bit when, I mean, I should know this anyway, but the information that came from DFA, and just to see, okay, 30 farms. Milk goes there. And so it's Oakhurst, and then you have 30 farms. And everything, all the people that deal with them, and then the same thing with Hood. And so to keep all of that stable and strong, as farms leave, then it makes those two businesses in Portland weaker. And we need to keep the farm strong, but keeps those two businesses strong, and it just helps. When you think about milk supply to stores or schools or whatever, it's just, the tier program has got to be at the top of the list.
Yeah. Yeah. How is the sound quality for those online? Commissioner Beal, are you able to hear the group fairly well?
Yep, I can hear it perfectly.
Great. I was definitely hearing that from others as well, that from a prioritization standpoint, I'm sensing that all of you would be in agreement. If I'm wrong, correct me. that somehow we need to ensure that we're elevating the tier recommendations, and that is first and foremost. Hi, Ethan. You're over there on the other side. So we can certainly do that in the report and make sure that that's clear. Any other thoughts about the tier program recommendation?
I don't know if this is possible to consider and be, I think one of the challenges that comes up, and this is something that came up in our discussion with at the legislature last session, is that the way we calculate what payment will be in the budget cycle is that it's all based on projections for 3 years. And there's no way to project what the milk price will be for 3 years out. And so it becomes this like a crystal ball that if we could project milk prices out 3 years, we'd all be, you know, really good shape. But that's just not possible. So I'm not sure how, if there's a way of sort of, there's any way to shift how we make that calculation, or if it's a requirement to have to project out 3 years, because it's virtually impossible to do that. And because look what's happened just recently, milk price has gone out, this year program hasn't paid out nearly as much as they anticipated it paying. So it's like this argument that we have every session about raising these levels because it's anticipated it's going to cost the state this much money because of these projections, but then it ultimately sometimes doesn't end up paying out. And so I just think it's worth us noting that. I don't have the answer. But I think that it is worth discussing, or at least mentioning our recommendations.
Can somebody, just so I can be helpful here, can somebody give me a 30-second summary as to why that is, why there's the 3-year? Yeah.
The budget cycle is done, usually when you're discussing in the legislature, they're discussing the current supplemental budget, so that's 1 year. And then you're discussing the biennial upcoming, which is a minimum of 2 years. Usually the appropriations committee asks me for 3 to 5 years of projections. And they're just numbers, anything beyond 18 months, which is built on educated guesses from those who understand market details far more intensely than I do. Anything else is just, I tend to throw out just an average. It's done because Maine requires a balanced budget, and they have to have a number. And this program drives appropriations and drives the budget staff nuts, because it's the only program in state government that has the flexibility built into the statute that however much money the program needs, the state is supposed to transfer to cover. And so, it does result in, especially when money is tight, legislators erring on the side of caution, and, either putting in lower than full value or putting restrictions on how the money goes out, or those types of things, which end up eroding the safety net value of the predictability of the program. But it's a very structured financial process that, we are trying to fit this odd duck program and work with that, and we're at the mercy of what they need.
Gotcha. Yep.
You mentioned just quick that it's the only program like that, but it can't be the only thing in the budget like that, right? I mean, fuel prices, for example.
It's the only thing, they build in some, every budget builds in a little bit of flexibility for that, but department budgets, everything, it's a finite appropriation. And you have wiggle room within it, so say fuel prices go up, wherever, you do what you can to adjust, or you go back and you ask for supplemental funding. But it is the only program in state government, not even in DHS, do they have anything that basically provides payments on, or funding on demand, like to your program.
kind of to build on what Annie was thinking, and then it just got a thought when Julie mentioned fuel prices, you know, you have departments, they're budgeting for the price of fuel, so they budget it out, and it is what it is. But the difference between that and what we did was the cost reduction study said we needed $6.55. And then the legislature took a percentage of that, and that's what we got. If they'd have fully funded it, and gave us the $6.55, the projection that Julie had sent out wouldn't matter. It would cost more, but the farms would be protected to that short run break even. That increase of $6.55 that we're asking. That's the difference. This wouldn't be an issue if it was fully funded, because the $6.55 increase would have been met. And then, but the issue lies when the legislature took that number because it was large and had to cut it back. And then, once it was cut back, realized the price of milk came up. And the flavor of the legislature was to help the farms, and now they're not able to help the farm because they cut it back and the farmer's not getting that money. So we're still under what we need to break even.
Even though the milk prices.
Even though the price of milk has gone up, we're not to the point where it's up so high that we're above what the short run break even price was in the cost reductions.
Just a question on, since money isn't being paid out, where is that extra money going? Back to the general fund? Is it going to it's fund to help when the price goes the other way again, or?
It was really never anywhere, it was always in there. Correct, so it's not really, it never had got set over here for us.
Right.
It was always in the general fund, so it's just not coming out.
And so they have to look at the year or 2-year window and say, okay, at this moment in time, it looks like the tier program over this length of time is gonna cost X. And so they set aside, on paper, they set aside that much. And then they can allocate or appropriate whatever money is left available for spending to anything else in state government that they're looking to do. So, I mean, it's kind of nebulous, and then as the tier program needs it, I send a message over to the controller's office and say, this month, we need X amount of general fund dollars transferred into our account. It's usually however much the tier payment is, minus the Oxford Casino money, that's what we need. And so it's done on a monthly basis.
Is there any other way to just, I'll move on because I want to be careful to not use this as a way for me to be getting up to speed, but I just want to be clear that had the projection been higher than it was, and then the legislature needed to drop it by a certain percent, and they dropped it, it would not have been as low a number as it turned out to be. Has there been any efforts to say, well, rather than projecting it at the average, we should be projecting it at the whatever? Commissioner Beal. Commissioner Beal, go ahead.
I was just wondering, as we are having this conversation, and I don't mean to put Julie Marie on the spot, but is there a number, like a baseline number that approximately, every year gets spent out or paid out, that you can name off the top of your head? And what's the gap between that number and say what would have been 100% of the and I think they went with 25%, is that right? The legislature versus 100%. Does that make sense?
Yep, so I've run some averages. In the last 10 years, on average, the tier program has paid out around $7 million a year on average. Some years that was zero. Some years that was well into double digits. It just depends, but for a long time, the legislature was going on the assumption that, there was roughly a 2.5 million to 5 million was kind of the baseline. I think they've used that logic before. I think as the program has become more complicated and definitely as we've seen. The cost of production increase, and so we're talking big numbers, they've kind of moved away from that. But you know, there is that assumption that if they start on, we could say it's, you know, somewhere between 7 to 10 million a year would, you know, if it were dedicated money that could roll over into a future year, that might be helpful.
But the gap, I think she's asking. the
Yeah,
gap.
we'd also need to, if we did that, I mean, in the years that we have to pay out more than the average 7 million, it requires a transfer, like I say, they literally transfer the money over. And the statute says, whatever it's determined the tier needs, they have to transfer.
I think what she's asking, but is the difference between that average that has been spent out
Yep.
over the last decade and what was provided this year, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
And that's a really impossible question to ask, number one, without my laptop to punch numbers in.
Sure.
But also because we have to look at the fiscal years, like we're just starting into this fiscal year with the new numbers. And so however much money it looks like we're gonna need, that's what we're gonna get. For the tier program at the 25%. Right now, my latest projections are saying we're gonna need about 3 million for all of fiscal year 25. Now, I could get a forecast tomorrow and turn that whole thing on its head, and we could go from needing 3 to needing 13. That's just the nature of dairy.
Got it. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for just talking that through, Julie Marie. And I knew that was probably an impossible thing to just figure out on the fly, but I do appreciate, I like the conversation that, you know, was happening a little bit earlier about trying to find, is there a baseline number that we can get the legislature comfortable with? And then the idea is that if we find that we expect that we're going to need more, or there's going to need to be sort of a topping off, maybe it's less scary to talk about that number in the future than it is to talk every year about the big number, if you know what I mean. I think once something's in the baseline, people can plan for it and get comfortable for it. But yeah, I'm just wanted to add my 2 cents to that conversation.
And just
Hold on just 1 second, Ethan.
Well, I was just gonna say there's 2 levels to this, right? So this year, they cut, rather than saying the full break even cost of production, they said, let's give you 25% more than before, whatever the number was. And they didn't say, but we're not gonna give you more than 10 million. We left that wide open.
Right.
So if we'd had a bad year, the farmers might have gotten. But if they had done the opposite this year, it would have worked better. If they had done the higher prices and limited the amount of money, people might have gotten more money throughout the year for this year. But in another year, that could have been disastrous. It would have paid it all out in 1 month and we'd have been hungry the rest of the year kind of thing, right? So that's the problem with this whole discussion, is it kind of needs to be both. It needs to be the higher break even cost of production, and we need to make sure we have enough money to fund that, no matter the situation, which could be high or could be nothing.
Well,
This year we spent below average and we could have used some more, but the way we set it up, which was the compromise that everybody agreed, like was a good compromise at the time, was like, oh, it could have been a little better.
That's why it's so important and that's why the 25% that we got of instead of getting $6.55, we get 25% of that. And that's why that was still a positive for dairy farms, because that just increased the baseline. And the baseline is really the most important thing that we have here, because like really, you don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow. We could have a pandemic. We did have a pandemic.
Right.
And things were going great until we had a pandemic that year. And things went upside down, and without that tier program, most of us would be.
And that was one of the weird times when we had 2 months, especially 1 month, of like ridiculously low milk prices that nobody had ever seen before. But it came back a lot quicker than anybody expected it to. So in that situation, like kind of either way might have worked. we didn't need a little for a long time, or we didn't need a lot for a little time, you know what I mean?
Well, I'm wondering just from hearing this whole conversation, whether there is work that could be done by a certain person to think about what a recommended baseline might look like that would, take the, the heat off of a supplemental request, if needed, and that we come back next month with a modified recommendation that adds that concept in.
I think that's probably
I'll just
it,
put-
right?
I mean, I can draft up some things for the next meeting, but I think a couple things to keep in mind. Even if, you would have to put a baseline in and have a dedicated account that goes with that baseline. So that will require a little bit of structural work. But when appropriations looks at it, they're still gonna say, okay, there's this much here, oh, and you need more. I mean, they're still gonna add it together. It is,
But-
two pieces is just, it is another way to look at it, and it might be a better lobbying tool.
At the same time, this is the classic, like, we can't prepare for the worst disaster ever on this, like, we're gonna just have to come and ask for more if we have another pandemic probably, right? But we shouldn't also say, we'll probably never need this again, because we're probably going to.
But the other key thing to remember is right now, the way it is written, they put a number in the budget. And basically, I'll be honest, I ignore that number because whatever is needed by the tier program is what I get transferred over, and that's the way the statute reads. So it's unlike, it's under the
Like
current
LIHEAP or any
setting.
of those things.
When appropriations meets again, they look at what we. And that's when they get all upset because, then it throws their numbers off. But right now, the program has the ability to draw what it needs. Financially, it's just that, there's a lot of sticker shock and a lot of confusion when the conversations take place at the budgetary level. So.
Okay. All right, well then let's do that. We will come back with a modified or an expanded recommendation. If there's.
Yeah, we've lost camera for some reason.
Lot.
We've lost the camera. I'll,
Okay.
if I can get that.
But those online can hear.
I can hear.
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, and is the camera back?
It is
Yeah.
on, but it's off to the side, but that's okay. We know what you all look like.
Okay. All right, well, you got a good view of the classic, and the chair. All right, then let's move on, to the next one.
Can I just ask one question? If we go and have to change, if we could change it to have the money put aside to help fund the tier program. It does.
I don't know, actually, before I should clarify, I'm not sure if it needs to change the statute. We need to change the structure of where the money goes. I don't think we need to change the statute, because we already have the Oxford Casino money that gets rolled over. The only thing is because it's a small amount, they just stick it in the milk pool and, and we keep track of it. If we're gonna move everything, that's not a workable structure. But I will have to look into what would be involved in creating a dedicated account.
Just that I think it should be known that right now, the dairy farmers of the state of Maine are not pulling on the general fund as much as they have in the past. And if that money's been dedicated to us, could it be put somewhere so that when we do have to pull more money, we're not pulling as hard on the general fund as we are. Right now, we're giving the general fund a little bit of a break. But we don't know 2 months from now or 6 months from now what things are gonna look like, and if that money that might have been paid out to us could have been put into another fund or designated for that purpose, wouldn't it help the general fund in budgeting and?
You're almost saying a rainy day fund for.
Yeah.
Reserves are standard accounting practice.
Except in New York State. The government, they're funky.
The acknowledgement that that's happening is
Right.
also something that we, that it's always like, oh, dairy farmers cost me and it costs me, this program costs so much money. We never talk about when it doesn't cost as much as everyone thought it was going to, so.
And in the past, the legislature has come forward and asked that money to come out to the farmers in another form of payment also, so I think they acknowledge it.
I would like that to happen, like the only problem, I think, when there is. When you're at appropriations or they have people pulling from every direction. And if they don't send some our way, then there are 12 other groups that are looking the other side, so it's,
Everybody's happy with the surplus.
it would be a hard
Great.
pull, I think.
I just wanted to add to, I know this is delicate, Julie Marie, because of the legal separation. But it also seems like this program is never discussed in connection with the revenue that the fees are bringing in. And it just seems like that would be useful information to have the appropriate committee reminded of.
It is, except there are legal reasons why, that there were court decisions that it required to be kept separate. It is acknowledged that the handling fee does bring in a little bit, but the handling fee, because it's only on fluid milk, it's on all fluid milk sold in Maine. And fluid is not a vibrant growing category. I mean, we're averaging between 800,000 and 1 million a year. So, it's in there, it's brought up, appropriations does, I mean, there's a line when they look at revenues in there, but it's not it's not connected, and there are very firm legal reasons why that has to be.
I was wondering if you ended up with a dedicated fund, you're getting close to stepping on that connected.
Not it, well, yes, if you put the handling fee in a dedicated fund, yeah, definitely we're in trouble, we're running afoul of the.
That's what we've always tried
two
to,
things. But if
kind of why we get away from not having a dedicated fund is because it made it too easy to connect the dots.
Yeah, though, if the money comes from the general fund and goes into a dedicated fund, you gotta think of the general fund as being like the ocean, everything gets whirled together, and so it no longer has
Right,
that.
the right lawyer can connect the dots much easier.
All right, I think we have the direction we need. And we'll move on and see if we get it closer next time around. We'll add some narrative because, for a number of reasons, because, certainly hearing that this needs to be kind of a bulk of the recommendations, if you will. So we'll do that, but we'll also add the issue of a baseline.
Yeah, I'd like to say one thing before we completely leave the section. I think it's really critical that as much as this is a dairy task force, when we talk about how the tier program functions, I think we need to talk about it as a tool of economic development. Because the reality is the money is going to support far beyond just our dairy farms. And they are servicing, those businesses, as well as those municipalities, are servicing a far greater percent of Maine's population. And
And if you feel that that is not adequately captured in the narrative that I drafted, I'm totally open to getting more thoughts from you on that.
That's a little bit-
Yep. Okay, sounds great. All right, so just a question then on this second bullet under the tier program about establishing an additional source of funding. Have we covered that, or is there anything more that needs to be discussed about that? You know, at the last meeting, we were throwing around, or no, I'm sorry, not at the last meeting, I think at the tier subgroup meeting, there was some discussion about potential funding sources for that, whether it be increasing gambling proceeds, an allocation of that, or some percentage of tax on marijuana or tobacco sales. Anything that you want to discuss about that, or move in the direction that we just talked about and back up there?
So is this gonna come out as as suggestion at this point, if we don't remove it, or?
This is so first draft, so
Yes.
nothing here is going to look the same. My instinct would be that unless you all feel that we should be talking specifically about gambling proceeds or marijuana or tobacco, that we would take that out, and that we would replace it with something to do with a baseline allocation through the general fund. But if I'm wrong about that, just tell me.
I don't know, I get nervous when we get on one horse only. I really do, and I think that no matter what we decide, there's got to be several alternatives. Because people are gonna bang away at no matter what we have. And I'd rather have a fallback position, which is something different than what we've got right now. I'm not particular about what it is, but I am particular that there should be something more than the existing program.
So we also will talk about this bond recommendation later, whether that factors into this or not, I don't know, based on what I mentioned earlier, that, you know, is it a good idea or a bad idea to tie a bond to a tier program? Other reactions about this not fleshed out recommendation, the second one.
Then I don't think we should take it out. I think we should flesh it out more. I recognize the idea of putting a tax on other agricultural products is not ideal. I think in my personal opinion, I feel that when we talk about nutrition and I know like other products that do not provide nutrients, we're talking about different things. Not downing other agricultural products, I'm just saying that I think we're talking about different things. So I would like to flesh this out more because I agree with Bill that having just one option I don't think that's very smart. I think giving another idea can't hurt.
Do you mean a different idea for funding, are we talking about, or in
Yeah.
addition to?
Yes.
Not like a new tier program or something?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay,
Getting legislators to think about other ways of increasing revenues and directing some of those revenues into our program.
which is okay as long as it's not specifically on milk handling or whatever.
But we currently have the Oxford Casino.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like 0.5% goes into the tier program. As long as it's not a tax on milk,
right,
then it can support our program.
So I'm hearing more yeses, keep it in there. In terms of fleshing it out, what's missing? Like, it's not a lot there, I understand, but what additional research, what else would you like to see?
I mean, basically, Julie Marie has talked about somewhere between $5 and $10 million is what's needed to support it, depending on a lot of other factors. So I think that if you have a goal in mind, let's call it 7.5 million, just to split the baby. Then you could go look at whether it's marijuana or tobacco sales or XYZ. You could make a number that could be put into legislation which would enable that amount of money to flow into the tier program. So if we took 7.5 million as a base in our minds and looked at some taxation measure that would routinely kick off 7.5 million, it will be a small number relative to the whole thing. And if you look at the actual dollars collected from either tobacco or marijuana, marijuana happens to be going like this, and tobacco and everything else are going like this,
In gambling.
and a lot of others are there.
We talked briefly about manufactured products where one of our funding sources is the gallon milk. And I can't remember, kind of felt like it was a difficult situation to do, but I would feel more comfortable if we could put some sort of a usage fee on the products that we're making, rather than asking somebody else's product. You know, I feel like if I see people quit smoking, you know, we're out here trying to talk them into smoking a few more packs. It doesn't seem that ethical.
More that you're going after other sections of agriculture. We're trying to support our own section.
Right. So adding to yogurt or cheese.
Right.
Right.
And I don't know the logistics of that. It's probably, it might be out of our reach, but it just seems like if we could, and especially with the way the trend is going with fluid milk. So if 20 years from now, there's nobody drinking any fluid milk at all, then that funding source is gone completely.
But ice cream and cheese
Ice cream, cheese.
are going way up.
I think that's the direction that we ought to look at. I agree with Heath that I don't really feel comfortable going out onto tobacco or, you know.
Do we get in the same problem with other dairy products that we get in with the problem with processing fee for milk now?
Then it would have to just go in the general fund.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if it's even, I don't know, where we have products made out of state, or I don't know what. That would take some more research.
Well, currently as it is, all fluid milk sold in the state of Maine is assessed a handling fee. And that's to create a level playing field within the bounds of the state of Maine. We probably have to, I mean, you're drawing on the taxing power of the state in moves like this. So, you know, we call it a fee, but let's call it a duck. And you know, it would then go on what those products that are made here, as well as those products that are brought into the state. And ultimately, that would be a consumer borne tax. So, you know, those are some of the kind of different ways it's going to be nuanced in the discussions.
Well, and in general, it's not gonna be looked real favorably upon, like, I mean, we try not to tax bread and milk and diapers, right? I mean, like.
Yeah, Annie?
And ultimately, we don't have the same like checks and balances system set up as we do with the milk commission that's actually a regulated, making sure that we have meeting minimum prices. So,
The milk commission has limited control over class 2 products and no authority over class 3 and 4, 3 being cheese, 4 being butter powder.
So I'm hearing, not a lot of appetite on taxing, given our recommendation, I suggest taxing other agricultural products, marijuana, tobacco. I'm hearing mixed reactions about suggesting a usage fee on products such as yogurt, cheese, and ice cream. I'm not quite sure how you all are following on that one, hearing both sides of that.
I just feel like it would be hard to regulate.
I'd love to see it happen, but I don't know that it could be regulated. I would like to see the people that enjoy our products fund this product. You know, you'll have people, I mean, that's what's happening now. I mean, our taxpayers are funding the tier program. Some of them are lactose intolerant and aren't eating any.
Well, if you're lactose intolerant, we've got products for that.
Right.
I mean, we already have a flow of funds from gambling proceeds. I think that's where we have to look to try to increase that or, you know, shift it, try to get more of a percentage. I mean, that already exists in our whole system, so instead of trying to recreate the wheel and set up something new, why don't we try to sort of figure out how to increase that?
Ethan?
So I don't mean to change the subject, but I've talked to other people about this before too, and part of it comes back to. I was thinking, okay, so maybe there's other things you could do that, you know, other products maybe that are taken away from dairy products or milk, you know, let's tax soda or something and then it'll go to, right, like I'm just spitting stuff out, but at the end of the day, Maine's a pretty small state. Consumes a pretty small amount of dairy products. Within comparison, a pretty small amount of soda too, probably, right? Like even if we said all ultra pasteurized dairy products would be taxed because, you know, tariff, whatever, it's not gonna generate enough money. It's not a big enough thing that I'm not sure it would really do what we want or I mean, we need to have a few numbers. If we do a 5% fee on all the rest of the dairy products in Maine, does that generate $1 million, $500,000, $7 million? I don't know.
It's much larger than that.
I'm sure, but just,
Well, would it be helpful to come back with some figures? Where
some too, I don't remember what the.
Is it possible to, do we know how much yogurt, cheese and ice cream is being consumed in Maine?
It was actually presented by Sarah, one of
Yeah,
our.
okay.
Yeah, right, that's what I was,
We
yeah.
can do some broad extrapolations, they're not accurate, and again, those are not numbers collected in Maine. So, you know, again, we would be reliant on outside numbers and outside voluntary reporting.
Sure. Well, I wonder, so there's that avenue of just getting an understanding of what 0.5%, that, you know, whatever, that we come up with a couple of scenarios based on some very small percentage of total sales of products we make as option one. Option two would be, you know, running a couple of scenarios of increased casino revenue. Or slots, maybe making it super specific to what how we're already receiving money. So Oxford Casino slot revenue. We come up with just a couple of those scenarios. And then perhaps a third would be looking at marijuana sales or tobacco sales. And again, understand a little bit more about how much money we're received by the state on that, and hypothetically coming up with a couple of scenarios for percentages. I'm not quite sure how else to have you know, have enough information to be making a recommendation.
Well, Julie Marie, I think basically on the cost of production, things were fairly straightforward for quite a while, and then COVID hit. COVID changed the numbers drastically for everybody.
Yes, well, not just COVID, but the inflation that followed.
That's.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at what was basically able to be funded and the amount of money funded prior to the, let's call it 2020. And then look at 2020, both within the context of the cost of production and then what was actually required to provide payments in the tier program. We could start to come up with some sort of concrete numbers that we could say, whether it's planted, whether it goes to the handling fee, X, Y, Z, whatever. If we can get a real number, put before people and say, this is what we need, they can understand it. And when we say, we can do it from here, we can do it from there, we can do it from here, which would you like us to do?
And there's one other piece that we really haven't talked about, and that is, there's a new cost of production study every 3 years, which is major substantive rulemaking, which needs to go to the legislature. So every 3 years, we're also changing the numbers and changing to respond what's going. So we can do a big, historic look. But we gotta keep in mind that it's not just the revenue side or the funding side that's changing. The cost of production itself is also changing over time along with whatever prices are doing. So, we do have to, I think it's worth having some discussions on ways we can either make it easier to move cost of production updates to the system, or to, to formalize their adoption in a way that's more routine. I don't know. Those actually have some big policy ramifications, so.
All right, well, let's wrap this one up because you have 10 or 12 other recommendations. And I'm not sorry to focus this much time on this one, because obviously it's the most important one. But if you want to be more specific on possible alternative funding sources, I think we give you more information. And we can do our best to get pieces of information for you by the next meeting. It will be in no way, there will be as many questions as there will be useful, outcomes from that, but go ahead.
I'd like to propose something that I sit down with Julie Marie and throw stuff around. For anybody who doesn't know it, my career started as a statistician, quality control, and I testified before governments around the world about how you figure things out. So I'd be glad to work with Julie Marie for a little while. Maybe we can put something together so it's available to distribute to everybody.
That would be great. I would say less is more in terms of, content, plus you don't have time to do more, we're in a short timeline. But I do think, looking at not just, dairy product sales, looking at the other avenues as well would be very helpful. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. All right, moving on. In-state dairy processing. No, technical, sorry. Reactions to the first recommendation, and what you'll notice there and what I mentioned in the email was that I didn't separate out the recommendations by subgroup because there were a number of things, particularly on the technical service side, that overlap between particularly the peer program, well, no, particularly the final subgroup, funding and technical assistance and processing. So I tried to put it all in there in one, that might not be the best way to do it, but thoughts on this one?
I definitely feel that the technical services has to be addressed if our dairy farmers are going to be one way or the other. Where and how it is, I think if we put something in the main educational system, they've been doing nothing but cutting things back for the last 15 to 20 years. So we'll probably, it's like, I think. Go ahead, Brett, Julie.
I just think that when we're talking about technical assistance, it might help to use some buzzwords, like assistance in accommodating climate change, new techniques, new methods, those types of things. It might be a way to open some buckets for funding. It might be able to piggyback on some new things that are being established as well. And climate's not the only thing, but if maybe a subset of this recommendation is that as various parts of state government and academic services are looking to at the big picture for this, that they make sure that they carve out a little specialty for dairy so that our farmers can tap into homegrown pocket of ideas and people to help meet these needs.
I'm of mixed mind as to whether it's contracted out or whether it's put into some kind of physical person structure. I think the need is there. I do think the needs for starting farmers are very different than someone looking to change products. And so the requirements of the technical assistance depend on the individual consumer of that. So I sort of agree with Julie Marie, maybe we can tag on to other things. But I also think that if there were a fund within the Department of Agriculture specifically for services of technical assistance, and that amount of money may have been enabled to reach out to a Cornell or UNAS or Pennsylvania or whatever, if there was a contract with them that we prepay or something. And so that gives us X number of hours or whatever have you. But a way to contract it out so that we're into organizations that routinely provide that and we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Good point, just because, I mean, you can have a support system in Maine, but in certain cases, you need people that really specialize on certain things and you don't have to ask them and then they research, you ask them and they know.
Sure.
So that's a good point about reaching out to
So
others to do that.
I think during some of the subgroup meetings, the thought was, for us to be as specific in our ideas of how that technical service would be provided. And so I could certainly add some reference to, or, having some funding housed within the department that could provide, either contractors or something or staff, I don't know, to provide that service. Just to list a number of options. We did hear in the subgroup meetings that while that extra capacity within cooperative extension would be very helpful. It may be hard to secure, but that what I was hearing was that you didn't want to suggest that that wasn't the ideal. So if something is added that makes reference to the department as well, is that sufficiently worded? Is there anything else missing from that recommendation? Yeah, Julie.
I think whether it's a recommendation to the department or to a cooperative extension, I think we need to put a little bit more meat on the bones as to what we want from that position. Because just saying you want a position is one thing, but there are so many aspects, especially in academia, of potential dairy research. And if we just want another dairy body, that's one thing, but if we're looking for specific types of assistance, whether it's business planning, whatever it might be, then we might need to put a little bit more framework on the recommendation.
Okay, so reference to on-farm dairy and value-added processing, infrastructure improvements and modernization, business, financial planning, grant writing, and transition planning is not.
I think there are multiple. I think that is in some ways so broad, and there's kind of separate buckets. And I'm just afraid that, somebody's gonna say, well, okay, you just need a generalist, versus.
Sure. Yeah.
I struggled with how to frame that for a few reasons. One is that on one hand, yes, if you have all of this list of things like business planning and infrastructure are just like not going to come with the same person. The chances that one person has those two expertise, very slim. On the other hand, there are always buckets of money from because the cooperative extension is established federally. we don't want to narrow it so tightly that we are cutting off access to potential options for federal funding for a new extension position, even if that's top off funds to help us accelerate that hiring process. So I think being a little bit cautious about where do we want to prioritize those areas might be more helpful. And so that we have a list of things that we know we need, we have a list of things that we would like first. But if the money comes up from the feds to do one of our low priority things, we might as well snatch that up too.
Go ahead.
In my mind, there really are two buckets. One is sort of the technical side, whether it's either infrastructure or operations or how you handle the cows or a number of other things. And the other one is sort of business related. So like business related, you've got FFF that's been going for a long time, which is in the business of creating business plans and expanding their whatever their charge to include some things like grant writing and a bunch of other stuff would make a lot of sense, whereas if we could get someone on the technical side who is actually fully knowledgeable on both either the cow operations or the processing side. There's only two different things in there, one way or the other. You get into the equipment processing other products, or you get into the cow side.
Farms to the Future has come up a couple times. I'm curious if, I have obviously a little bit of an extra stake in this question, but I'm curious what, I guess how much, whether you want to make that a recommendation or more explicit, just Farms to the Future need to feature none of these, but also how much more are we willing to actually put into this? Because for us to expand beyond simply business planning, we would need additional staffing. We would need an enormously changed amount of money that we can offer to farmers. So that would be a big budget change.
And I prefer to see something like that. A big budget change.
Well, Farms for the Future, you can cater your technical assistance to your own business plan. So you can use it to contract with an engineer. Or, and at the same time also as like a business consultant for your business plan.
Really, the only thing we cannot do is marketing. Specifically, as long as it's built into the whole business plan, sure.
I mean, it's not a huge amount of money to do all that with.
Exactly, it's
But I think
success.
it's one of those programs though, that it is, you can work within it to find what you need for your farm specific. So I don't know that, I mean, more money, yes, would be great, but I don't think that you need to shift that program vastly in order to change the way it works.
It's only that if we're going to add that many more projects, we don't have, but we just don't have the capacity.
Yeah, but just, I would wanna say that that's a really well-run program. Yeah, you might have to say, so.
Yes.
But
I'd
I,
like to see expanded.
yes, I would also as well. As someone who's taken advantage of that program, worked very well for us. I think one really missing piece in our extension officers and all the technical assistance available in the state is like practical on-farm value-added processing infrastructure improvements, like an on-farm consultant. Who can come to your farm and say, here are the ways that you can improve this, and this is the way we can do it potentially cost effectively, that wouldn't, not isn't building a brand new barn, or, here's a way you could do it that might work, and we can piece together these pieces, and that's really missing, I think, in our whole system. And it understands farming in the Northeast.
So is there any other way that you would like to, I'm hearing, make it more specific, but keep it general. I definitely hear that as the priority. We can clarify that. Is there any other perspectives on how we should be prioritizing, if you want to be prioritizing this list of types of technical assistance?
And I think that given what everybody has said about the grant writing, and ways to go after money for specific things, that whole business planning aspect supports the whole grant writing thing, that if you haven't got your business plan, you're not gonna have a grant. That's as simple as that. So if we don't do something there, then we're restricting what's happening. But then when you get into the technical stuff, I still think, either lease or buy, okay? We're either gonna buy or you have a cooperative extension person, which is probably going to be focused in one area. It'll be difficult to get multiple areas. Or you try and lease some people from Cornell or UPenn or whatever. I think that their programs are so well established that if we worked out a service contract with them, we could get things at a reasonable price and be able to do different areas. And it just, go ahead, Rick.
I'm curious from that list of types of technical assistance that are needed, which would really have to be provided by somebody in Maine? And which could be contracted out, which would have to be someone you could call to come to a farm visit and maybe on a week's notice? And who could be maybe based out of Pennsylvania or New York and planning months out to make a bigger meeting and discussion?
I think what Annie said is, if you could come in and just look at this, my whole thing, that's something that sort of has to be in state, but maybe that's a very subsection of the extension. They're directed by people either that we've contracted with, either in Pennsylvania or Cornell. And say, I need to look at this, or let's zoom together and see what that looks like in the farm and also. But the real technical stuff about equipment, sanitation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, need to go to experts.
You go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as a technical service provider who does most of these things and does it in multiple states, all of them end up being things that are better when you're in state. If somebody says, oh yeah, I just need you to come in one day, it always means 3 visits at least, because we talk about the first one and then we have it on, and when it's succession planning, especially. I had a guy call me today, he's like, I thought we had this all understood, but the last letter you sent, you said home farm, and I wasn't thinking the whole home farm, I was thinking this part of the home farm. And so we're like, okay, we gotta meet again. And that's really hard to pinpoint, and of course, we always end up with these discussions, everybody's, well, we can just pay somebody from Cornell and we can Zoom with them, pay for 700 Zoom visits and we'll be all set. It's like, that never works. I mean, it can, and it does, but it's just not the same, it's not as good.
Let me just bounce us to the second bullet for a moment. Is this yeah, just read that and tell me if that is
The second bullet.
the second bullet under technical service. Should this be a standalone recommendation? Should this be modeled after something that already exists? Is this another way of saying, expand the FFF? Just trying to.
I think it could be a standalone. It also could replace the first bullet. If they had the right person in this would be the person that came in and looked at the whole place and then just pair that. You need this, I don't have that expertise, but you need this or you need that. The one word in here that I was a little bit. I don't know the definition of, it says smaller dairy operation, so we either gotta define that or take it out. Because I think if we're only gonna work with this size dairy and then we just lose all the other ones, dairy industry's gone. So, if we have a dairy farm that has, $20 million infrastructure and we say, well, we can't work with that dairy farm because they're too big, then we, and they just needed this amount of help or that amount of help. I think all dairies are important regardless of size. So
There's another big piece to that too. If you're gonna have a technical provider, whether it's me or somebody new at Extension, it's really important to have them go to the big ones and see how it's going, because they can bring stuff back to the smaller ones and be like, okay, I know this isn't realistic for here, but here's what we did there. That's part of the training too. There's some on-job training no matter what.
It's gone. The word is gone. So,
with only 142, 41 and counting.
So,
Sorry, no, finish.
Well-
I had a separate thing that goes along with this.
you go ahead, Ethan.
Should we put in technical service? You know, we talk about this lots of times in other industries and we haven't talked about it yet. Should we say somebody that can encourage more dairy farms to come to Maine? I wonder if that would go well in the legislature.
I don't think it would.
I don't think it would. I think inherently, if we're doing things that are supportive of our existing farms, it becomes its own advertising or its own incentivizing people to move. I think we have examples of that. Folks, you know, who have made the choice to come to me for a variety, not just the programmatic things that we offer, but the whole package.
I think like what Julie just said, there has been examples where folks thought, wow, this is such a great program, I'm moving to Maine. And then they find out some of the things we've always said, that it costs more money to make milk.
No, I
Once you
get
know the
that.
cost of grain,
Yeah.
and paying that,
I get that. I'm not saying that to piggyback at all on the Q program per se, but I'm just saying. If we had an extension person that had, we could also put in there a skill of helping people transition to here, that goes along with the kid taking over your farm. Say, it's not much different than, you know, a 30-year-old moving here from Massachusetts, or, I mean, that's happened over the years anyways. How many of the existing farms do we have? One generation or two generations ago were from Connecticut or Massachusetts, right? The highway came through and they moved them in, but it happens all the time. It hasn't, as recently, but.
How about to support existing operations or, you know, new?
Yeah, growing or expanding or doing, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't mean just like the 18-year-old that graduates high school and let's get him into the dairy business. I just, somebody who has a few cows and a little experience, like,
Understood. Certainly can add.
provides more economic impact, keeps space open, like, all, you know what I mean? It doesn't need
So
to be just.
question is, are you seeing this as a distinct enough recommendation that it is complementary to the first? I heard one comment, it could sort of replace the first. I'm just, I need a little bit more feedback on this, just as a standalone recommendation.
Was this recommendation from us talking about like the shortfalls of the NRCS programs and their inability to fully fund like all the applications? I just asked because I reference the NRCS specifically.
The lack of staff to the process.
I don't think so. I think the model of the ability to come to the farm and say, well, this farm, I think this is what I remember, like. You don't have any place to raise your calves. Let's look at some funding to help you, let's help you get some funding to build a calf farm. Or, you know, you're expanding or kind of like that model.
You're polluting the stream.
Well, not necessarily, yes, if that was something needed, then yes, but I don't think we were thinking to replace it, we were kind of like that, like a.
I think it was like, if NRCS was fully funded all the time, it's a good program, but that's the problem with it. More so was like, oh, we could help you out, but it might be 6 years.
Because we had kicked around the idea of there being some state funding to help with some of the things that NRCS does, but they're always funding like 10% of their applications. So I was wondering if that's why this is a separate bullet point.
Commissioner Beal, can you hear, I don't know if you're trying to go through security right now at an airport, but are you able to hear right now? Yeah, okay.
No, so she's
All right.
saying,
I confiscated her
That's fine.
cell phone.
You're right. I wanted to check in with her about that because she too was mentioning that one of the subgroups that she attended, this was brought up, so I just wanted to make sure I was getting it down clearly from that. It wasn't the subgroup meeting that I attended personally.
I'll agree with Keith's point that it is very similar to the point above. I think that in an ideal world where Cooperative Extension is actually fully funded and staffed, this is what their goal is anyway.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of it. So something to consider.
So maybe we state it that way, like a gold standard example would be if cooperative extension was fully funded and it worked more like NRCS. And I don't know if, I'm picking on a word sort of like Heath was, just said grant funding. I mean, it could be grant funding or preferential treatment or DIF funding. It could be it could, lots of different stuff for funding, but
Annie,
I think we should make this recommendation and not necessarily specify where it lives. Meaning it could be a cooperative extension program, it could be a department program,
Yeah.
we make the recommendation. Given the challenges that cooperative extension is having for funding, I think it could replace number one. But like, we recognizing that we need the one-on-one technical support. It's like a blanket statement that covers cooperative extension and the department, and it says this is something that we recognize we need. It brings up again the question of prioritizing. Are we going to say these are in order of priority? This is how we want you to read these recommendations. This is how we're prioritizing things. It's just a more general question for us as we talk about these recommendations. The second thing is I don't want to lose number two. That securing contractual technical service capacity is a great idea. So I don't wanna say let's like totally get rid of the first bullet. Because I do think that there's something to that. I just am not sure where it lives. I don't think it has as much of a high priority as our second bullet point.
so I think I'm hearing from that there would be a way to combine these two bullets that sort of leads with that a program should be established.
Programs.
Or just get funding to the
Not-
programs that are already.
Not specifying exactly there, that provides that kind of one-on-one support, that also references value in securing contractual technical service.
Tapping into
Tapping into it. And bring it back to you, and then specifies the types of technical support needed. I can rework that and as one recommendation and see what y'all think of it. And I'm gonna have us go on a break and then we're gonna move on.
John just said it well, and I think maybe Bill agreed with him, but I think it's really important to say NRCS, cooperative extension, and maybe something else, because I think it would be bad to try and reinvent the wheel, try and make our own new service. Let's take the ones that we got that work pretty good and expand them. We don't care which
Well,
one.
we've got some programs there that just need to be funded, whether it's Farms for the
Yeah.
Future, cooperative extension. Work this, that those guys need the funding, which would in turn put somebody on the staff to do all these things.
I think the second bullet point should be the funding of whatever programs you're recommending.
Like suggest that this could be done through additional funding or staffing for NRCS or cooperative extension or Farms for the Future, like, and then you guys can all sit in a room and figure out who can do it fastest, the best, you know, but.
Years and years ago, there was some conservation, maybe there's still money available, like state money available, like we worked with NRCS. Like they didn't have enough, it was, in our situation, it was a newer pit. We had like some money from the state that went towards that newer pit while we still worked with NRCS. They handled the technical side of it. We got the money from the state. It was a grant, I think, and.
That was a dedicated fund for specifically for manure storage. Yeah, and I don't know what the status of that is.
Well, I think states often have stuff for cover crop or something that's a little bit like NRCS kind of administers and does it, but the state gives them some money for the conservation or something. Some of those may be federal too, but.
I'm gonna take Miriam and then we take a break.
That kind of model of providing the match cost from the state is where the Healthy Soils program that's launching is going.
So there's a model for that type of program.
Yeah, and it's launching right now in the state. And it is the problem that was brought up that it's maybe to be able to fund 10% of the applications that we see, so it's lucky.
Okay, I am inclined after our break to maybe move up public input so that you have the benefit of hearing perspectives, rather than physical meetings, so we'll do that. It's 12:37, so maybe quarter of, so 7 minutes. People here that's not like weeks, funny period of time. All right, so let's turn it over to public comment if there are any online, anyone online who would like to raise your hand so we can see you. Jenny, go ahead, Jenny. That's you.
Hi, thank you. I just really appreciate once again everybody's comments and really want to say I appreciate a lot of the comments in the room because I was able to strike off my own comments. So there's that. I don't know how happy people are to know that they evoked my own sentiments, but great job. I did have a couple comments on what you've talked about so far and what you will be talking about. With regards to the tier program and the recommendations coming from the committee, I know that you guys have spent a lot of really valuable time talking about the importance of including narratives from stakeholders throughout the dairy community as well as farmers. I think that what's also missing, and I don't know if it was implied by the use of the word narrative, is the why. And that this is not simply a recommendation to provide funding to dairy farmers. It is actually a recommendation for the state of Maine to invest in the food system, to invest in our environment, and to invest in our community and economy. And I think that that's a really important point and may help to shift the thinking of people who may think it's a lineup for a handout. And I hate to reduce it to such a thing, but when it comes to talk about budget lines, that's generally what people end up resorting to. Money is tight all over. It is tough to think about investing, but we need to remember that it's important to invest in things, especially in something being better. And in something you haven't discussed yet with regards to recommendations, the in-state dairy processing, I'm just, as a public funder as well, I'm curious about or what attention to detail for justification and rationalization is going to be provided. Not that I question the justification or the rationalization, but I'm just, what is going to be provided to make the argument very persuasive and foundational with regards to using public funds to create a processing facility in a state where we've identified so many issues with being a processor and being a dairy farmer in our state, many of which are outside of our control and some of them that we're trying to rectify. And I'm also, and this is hard to put in words that don't sound awful, and I really am struggling with whether or not to even say it, but the prioritization of the two products or product types that would be utilized for this, when organic milk is listed first, I'm just curious about, as a public funding request, what percentage and volume of Maine milk are we talking about? And also, why wouldn't, when it's been identified through most of these really fascinating meetings that have been so chock full of expertise and lived experience, when value added and diversified products has been brought up multiple times as being where the market is headed, wouldn't that be the focus and the best investment of public funds? I also wanted to just scoot back to when it was talking about other funding sources for the tier program. I don't know if it was brought up. There was camera issues, and sometimes I wondered if I was hearing everything, but when they talked about expanding it to other products, I wondered how that affected or possibly detrimented the people who produce those products in the state of Maine who aren't part of the tier program, if it would be difficult for them, if they would be exempted. Would it be something that hinders their ability to grow their business and continue to provide, some of the best products around? And so I just wanted to know if that was something that was sketched into figuring that all out. Thank you very much for the time.
Jenny, just one moment. Okay, I just wanted to make sure, Jenny, that your second point was captured because I had a hard time hearing it, just a piece of it, but I believe we got it. So thank you. Anyone else online? I should stop chewing here. Who would like to weigh in on? All right, well, if you do want to later, just raise your hand and we'll figure out a way. Okay, thank you. So let's move on then to resource database is on page 5 of your packet. And I will note, just before I forget, how many of you made a lot of notes on your copy and you have a bunch of comments? Julie Marie, you as well?
Well, the next thing,
What's that?
The next section.
Could you please share your comments with yeah, typed up with Mary and me, and then so that you can and Craig so that we can take a look at those and make sure that we're getting all the good bits. Okay, resource database, reactions to that particular one?
my page 5 was an in-state dairy process. Switch around.
Oh, sorry. No, you're right. I'm having a day.
Is it a good day, Joe? Is it a good day?
It's not so far. It's dairy processing.
Preparation for board.
Reactions to that first bullet on page 5, thank you. Anyone?
Just to kick it off, I just had a note that we need lots of meat on those bones. A lot of specific and I think we've had a great deal of conversation this morning that can translate to this section, you know, in terms of needing expertise, needing, you know, funding. But the whole conversation about should the focus be on fluid or should it be on value added is one that I think, you know, is important to discuss. And we think in terms of fluid because it's what we do, it's what we're known for, but it's not the only product out there, and it's definitely not a growing category.
Sure. And I'm happy to add more detail to this bullet and also flip the order of those examples 1 and 2. I did hear from you all that you were raising specifically organic fluid milk because there just is no option currently in the state. So if you are now feeling like you'd rather not include it at all or elevate it at all, let me know that and I can omit it, but that wasn't what I was hearing in prior meetings. So what's the overall sentiment about that?
I definitely think that if we don't support organic in a much more substantial way, we're not gonna have to worry about it.
Other reactions?
I was just with a long-term organic farmer this weekend, Lauren Barr Chase from Mapleton. And he said that he had made money his entire life, except for the last 4 years. And if he wasn't gonna make money, it's really hard to make money.
Others thoughts about that? Keep it in, but
I just think currently, currently, there's not, and correct me if I'm wrong, other than some smaller in-state processing, there's not, are people from Maine drinking Maine milk? Like if they go to Hannaford and buy organic milk, is it, where's that coming from now? No.
Unless it's one of the independent.
Right, unless it's, right.
So how is that?
I guess I should say, how much milk, if we replace all the milk that. I don't know, what's.
There's a
the-
market for fluid, there's a market for fluid organic milk. It's growing.
And so yesterday
Fluid is growing,
I drove
there's not enough.
up through from south of Boston and literally there's nobody past Wells, Maine. I mean, the people are not in Maine, our consumers are not here, they're in New England and I just think regional. But I mean, I don't know that, you know, it's just, where do you build that plan? Because it's way cheaper to truck milk in a tank. Once you put it into a jug, you can't haul milk, as much milk in a truck. And it's all about getting it there as cheap as possible. Yes, the farmer tends to pay for it, but it's a tank. They're gonna pay for it one way or the other, whether we put it in a bottle or tank, but it's just so important to get this milk to the people.
so
People aren't here.
I think there's a way to handle this unless I'm misunderstanding how a process, you know, the equipment within a processing facility. I think first and foremost, what I've heard you all say is that if there were to be a processing facility built in Maine, it has to have maximum flexibility, because we can't predict what those products are going to be 10 years from now, they're going to be the thing. Whether that means that there shouldn't be any equipment that would allow for raw fluid milk, maybe that's the question, but otherwise, I think you could just have a recommendation that talks about the plant with maximum flexibility and points out the fact that currently there is no processing capacity for example, there is no processing capacity for organic milk in Maine. Without elevating it, you know, without suggesting that.
That way we
that's
can
not-
ensure this on our departure of 117, get you guys into the.
I think that's Amanda's cell phone.
Oh, right, yeah. Let's see if she raised.
Well, I want to be careful because there could be processing capacity for organic, right? Like we could run it at our facility. There's not enough demand to facilitate the run. Or the milk is, do you know what I'm saying? Like it has to make economic sense all the way around to break into a production schedule to run organic. So like we can do it, but is there enough demand, you know, to your point, to get it somewhere to truck it in a gallon jug?
I think one of the things, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca or somebody else, but I think you said if we built a new plant in Maine, it would have to have maximum flexibility. I don't think so. I think they're not gonna build a new one in Maine because it has to have maximum efficiency. And maximum efficiency is huge. And if they're gonna build a huge one, they're gonna build a huge one someplace that the return on investment is 3 years or 6 years. And if you built a gigantic milk plant in Maine, it would be 25 years.
There's not enough milk to fill it.
Hold on, let's raise hands, because it's helpful. Go ahead.
And we're not talking about a giant milk plant, is the reality. We're talking about something smaller, mid-size, medium size. And so we're looking at different potential ownership structures, different product lines, and what has been researched and looked at for the past, 10 years. We're trying to build off of what has been done before, what there's market demand for. And using all of those things, that's where this focus on organic, that's where it comes from. So we're not trying to, build something that, not trying to build a plane while flying it. We are trying to go into this with eyes wide open. That does not mean it would be an organic only plant, because it is very easy to process both organic and conventional products at the same plant. It's my understanding that Hood does not have any capacity to process, the Hood in Portland does not have any capacity to process any additional milk.
I think that's where you run into an optimization model, right? And what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So I want to be careful going the record, just saying there's no current capacity, because there could be. If there's enough demand or enough return, you can make that accommodation, right? But if we're going to do a run that is a couple thousand jugs, I'm just throwing numbers out, guys, like no actual solid piece. We just have to make sense, because we have to clean and we have to start up on the organic and we have to tie up the silo space for it. So if it makes sense and we have the right amount of demand, totally. We can figure out the capacity constraints. I want to be careful saying that it doesn't exist, because I don't want someone to punch a hole in it.
Sure, thank you for that clarification, and maybe a useful word may be viable. There is not currently viable organic milk, dairy, with milk processing capacity. Bill?
Yes, Rebecca, when I had to shut the milk down back in 2014, we had a close association at that time with Oakhurst. And they basically said, well, how much would you want to process? And I said, oh, I don't know, maybe 1,000 gallons a run. And they said, well, we're running at 10,000 gallons an hour. I'm not sure we can fit you in right now.
it's a layer of complication, that's all, you know what I mean?
Yes, I
And
know.
it's not insurmountable, but yeah.
No, and just to put it in perspective, the dairy plants that are being built around the country today are being built at twice the capacity for what's there for milk, and then they're building the farms around the plants. It's huge. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of loads, hundreds of thousands of gallons an hour. And because it's also based on the margin is so little and the logistics to move that milk
Okay,
is so good.
let me dial you all back then. I'm just trying to take the temperature then. I'm hearing maybe you don't think that this should be a recommendation. That you don't think that it's a viable recommendation to think about additional processing capacity being implemented, constructed through public financing, that's nonprofit. Just throwing it out, because I'm hearing a lot of holes being punched in this.
If I'm being very honest, I don't think it's viable. And when you look at the products you'd have to make or the distribution involved, unless it's a very niche product, I just don't know. I'm just being honest, sorry.
So just remind me who was on the dairy processing subgroup. And so there are 6 people in the room who thought this was a good idea. So can we all hear from them?
I would think it would make a lot of sense for Pineland to sell their spot and for that to be purchased by a group of people. But I'm not sure how it would run. But I mean, it's, the location's there and it's a huge place and but I really don't know how several farms could utilize something like that and make it run. That's I don't really know how that would work. But I agree with Rebecca, I think, as far as something new, I think I would agree with what you'd said.
Others who were on that, in that subgroup?
Well, I guess, hearing Rebecca's comments and the questions about the volume of organic fluid milk in the state, that's something that we didn't have in front of us when we discussed it. I think there's certainly a feeling, at least my feeling, and I think it's common amongst the group, is that if there were a Maine-based, pasteurized, homogenized, fluid organic milk, I mean, I can't imagine I wouldn't very largely displace those other brands, national brands that are on the shelf. I mean, I think Maine consumers who are already choosing to buy organic milk, but who are not buying it directly from a small farm, if they want the convenience of the grocery store and they want to choose organically, if it's cost competitive, even if it's a little bit higher, I can't imagine that volume could be, the milk coming from Horizon and OB or whatever, and some of the store brands that are coming from Horizon couldn't be displaced. I mean, so I don't know what the number is. I mean, I don't know what the sales numbers are. But I have a really hard time. I mean, big part of what our firm does, like it's marketing and branding, and it's like, I can't believe that many consumers wouldn't jump all over that as the milk of choice for consumers who buy organic milk.
A great situation would be is if someone bought, say, that plant that I mentioned and could process for, maybe there were a dozen to 15 different farms that wanted to have their organic milk go through there, or they wanted to do cheese, or they wanted to do certain things that this person that owned that plant contracted those farms to do that. That's
I
what we do at the present time, but it's a farm and it's a business in Vermont. I'd like to do it in Maine.
don't know how this applies specifically to Maine, I don't know how this translates to specifically dairy, but I can say that right now, most consumer willingness to pay studies are showing that local is as or more important than organic. And so when you can label something as being exclusively local, the willingness to pay for an organic local item is very high.
So I think there's two separate issues here. One is if it happened to be processed in Maine so that it could be sold in Maine, there's a high level of confidence in the room that there's a market, which is not the same as saying that therefore it's economical for a current processor to process it. And if the dairy processing subgroup was thinking that it was a logical public investment to potentially fund a processing facility, is there another way of getting at it by subsidizing the processing within an existing facility? That sounds like it could theoretically have room if the numbers worked.
I agree with what you're saying, and I think that makes more sense to work with what we've got. There's a couple of other names of processors that have room that people aren't mentioning or aren't saying that are doing something completely different that might be able to put a bottler in, a filler in.
Well, since we're under the cone of silence in a public meeting, could you mention what those names are?
I mean, there's Gifford's Ice Cream, for example, in Skowhegan. They can handle fluid milk. They only handle cream, right? Because they're making ice cream. And they make excellent ice cream. Would they put a bottler in and stuff if it was paid for half by low interest or something? Maybe. Kate's Butter is a large dairy processor in our state, makes an excellent product. They do Kate's Butter and they also do buttermilk. I don't know what else they do. I drive by the facility, I haven't been in it for a long time, but would they put in a filler and do organic if there was some sort of something? Maybe. They know how to run a dairy business, both of them do, I think. They've been around for a while. You know, some of those things, I just think, and you mentioned Pineland. I think that's an excellent idea. Isn't Pineland a nonprofit of sorts? Sort of, right? I don't know exactly how their governance all works, but sort of.
I mean, I'm forcing the issue here because the only way we're gonna end up with a productive outcome is if people.
Well, I mean, I like the idea of, you know, looking at a current facility and adding capacity, right? I mean, either through grant or investment, et cetera. It's just, you know, something a greenfield maybe isn't as viable if you're looking at public funds, right? Because the basis of the conversation was public funds, right?
Well,
Hold on. Annie, then Bill, then Ethan.
We've looked, Made the Maine Organic Milk Company is a company that exists that we've spent the last 6 years trying to find processing. We actually had an agreement with Pineland to process at their facility, and they decided that they didn't want to continue with our project. Like, as we were deciding on label sizes for our bottles. So that was a unilateral decision from the board level, they're nonprofit. So I don't know if Pineland is for sale, Steve. I don't think it is, but
It is. I just mentioned that because you had made that comment to me before, and I would rather deal with a company that's stable.
yeah,
Somebody else.
I mean,
versus-
we've looked around the state, we've talked to, I think, almost every processor. We have not talked to Kate's Butter or Gifford because they had their fire and so to say we've exhausted pretty much every potential opportunity other than Kate's Butter. We have, and it's, you know, yes, we've thought about this, like, yes, we tried to start with an existing processor because that is clearly what would be most viable, cost effective, the smartest way to start a brand, but that's not happening. And so the idea of a nonprofit owned processing facility is sort of reframing an ownership structure that might be able to leverage federal funds, potentially some state funds. It would mean that there would be the potential for it to only be owned in state and never be sold off to somebody out of state. There's just a lot of interesting information, lots of research to be done on this sort of potential opportunity. I'm fine with it not being something that the stakeholder group makes as a recommendation, because I think there's a lot of work that we are going to be doing in looking into it. I don't want the stakeholder group, however, to say that we looked into it and saw it as not a viable opportunity. That would be my one request. I would rather it just be something that we take off the table, or say that it's an opportunity that someone else is going to take and run with, because I don't want it to be seen as something that we don't see as a viable opportunity, because I think there are many people around this table who do see it as a viable opportunity. So that's.
Definitely agree with that. Yep. I mean, I understand folks' concerns. I also want to point out that in our group, we weren't talking about, and the way it's written makes it seem like we were talking about the state is going to build a plant.
We're not talking about.
No, we were talking about creating a nonprofit that would then leverage other funds, but that the state could perhaps fund a feasibility study or some very initial small amount of money. We definitely were not talking about the state building a dairy plant.
Yeah,
Thank you, my fault. I think, Bill, were you next?
Okay, 3 points. Rebecca, I feel fairly strongly that much like the steel industry, it used to be that the big steel mills were the only way of doing things, and they started making pocket steel processing thing and blew up the whole entire steel industry. I do believe that if a plant was started from scratch, you could be able to minimize both its energy content as well as its human content. And you could come up with, if it were a nonprofit, something quite compatible to what the larger process is doing, because we wouldn't have any. Once you discount the fact of the amount of money put into the plant itself, and you are a nonprofit, then you can move forward. And I do totally agree that I would never ask the state to fund an operating plant of any nature, period. I might ask them to provide funding for a major solar field so we could eliminate the cost of electricity and producing things like that. So altogether, I think that if we want to have something that initially can preserve at least the organic sector of the dairy process industry and have flexibility to produce not only organic, but regular, and that it also be able to produce other products. So it has to be that flexibility built into the plant as it's being built, so you don't add on later on.
Got it. Who did I miss? Sorry.
Well, I just want to say too, that like this idea and the idea of this nonprofit is a result of us like stepping back and looking at, okay, well, what is the ultimate problem here? Why do we even have the tier program? It's that farmers are never paid enough for the production of their money. So is there a way for us to get beyond that conundrum? And that is where the idea of having a nonprofit came from. You know, let's take the profit right out of the processing and the sales side. Okay, so the farmers theoretically are actually in control of, even more so than when they're in a cooperative, you know, the price of them. So that's where that came from. So I also just want to say, I mean, yeah, I mean, it'd be great if we could do co-packing in state, but it's confusing because I feel like we've talked about like Hood and Oakhurst in previous meetings, and we've been told that they've been running out of capacity and there wasn't capacity to do any co-packing in organic milk. So, and I did also just want to throw out the fact that yes, by volume of fluid milk, organic is relatively small, but we are more than 1/3 of the farms in the state of Maine. So, and that is why, you know, no, we're not trying to pit organic and conventional and all of that, but just that over 1/3 of the farms in the state of Maine do not have processing at scale in our state's boundaries. And it feels like without that, we have no control over our future. Because at the end of the day, Maine will always be more expensive than everywhere south and west of here. So we are always the ones who get screwed, and that's what it really feels like we're going through. When we look at the number of organic dairies that are leaving the state with the reduction in numbers of buyers, you know, I got cut by Horizon in 18, you know, I mean, This is just down, 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 and in the organic market in particular, it feels that way. I mean, it used to feel like maybe an opportunity. So,
You, Rebecca and then Heath.
So, because I don't like to take no for an answer, I just want everybody in the room to know this. I mean, I've already shot off some emails to operations and said, when is the last time we looked at this? You know, what would it take to make it viable? So because no has been said in the past, I'm not going to say it's going to be made going forward. So like, if there's an opportunity, I'll definitely run it up the flagpole and continue to ask the questions about why doesn't this work? Because we can make it work, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying no. I want the room to understand that the Greenfield project is going to be a really, really hard uphill battle, especially when you talk about a plant that does everything, because it's just a very hard business model. That's all. That's all. I just, but like, I'm supportive 100% and will do whatever I can in my role to try to open up a market.
That's great. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Heath.
Well, my question is, I guess for the group is, would the state actively backing help? Would that be better than what you've done with? I mean, and when you go into these rooms,
State
the way you've already been, if we went in with the state saying we're actively participating, would that help? That would be a different conversation, would it not?
I mean, the state has offered has offered to backing, like support in all the ways that we could potentially have, and it does not make a difference for some, like, it didn't make a difference with Pineland
Right.
at all, which you think it would, but
But like, if this nonprofit was formed, it would be different.
to have state support for,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I also feel like leveraging funds, that the dairy task force recommended that this thing happen, even if there is no state funding that we are recommending from this,
But to recommend support for a project like this, absolutely.
Okay, that's helpful, because that's where I was going next, that if, as I got it wrong, not through public investment, so I scratched that, when that's scratched, should, I started wondering, should this be in the recommendations at all, if it's not a state, facilitated process, but I'm hearing that there would be value in it nonetheless, so, okay, that's helpful, Ethan, thank you.
Just sort of the last thing that I'd say, I don't want people to think that I'm particularly dead set against this. I trust that you guys have done a lot of work on this and looked at it a lot, and I think that we need also a very strong, either in addition or twist this one a little bit, so it says, we want the state to support dairy processing any way it can. If that means a tax break to Hood to double their plant, awesome. If it means, low interest loans for infrastructure, the capital, like we have a few of those things coming, and maybe we should push to the dairy processors, like I've said before, maybe we can double them if you're doing dairy processing, something like that. And my own struggle with getting over the thought of how a nonprofit works that's not for me to decide or say. I mean, that's you guys to figure out and the state to figure out if they want to support it, but
Great.
I think in general, yeah, let's support processing however we can. It probably doesn't mean that the next Chobani plant is in Maine, but it could mean other things that are good for Maine.
Okay, I'm gonna rework this, I think I have what I need for a second draft, which will not be a final draft, but I think I get it. Thank you, very helpful conversation. Let's move on to resource database. And get reactions to that. I wanna flag the time, and I'm intentionally let me just back up. So, we will have another meeting on November 4th, and, actually, yeah. I'm gonna pivot for a second. In your packet, on page 7, is, this remaining draft time. So let's just look at that for a moment. I think it does make sense to look for a second. We're at October 7th. We've got the upcoming month to revise recommendations, to get additional information, like, for example, what Julie Marie and Bill are going to do, give you back a packet that will go out on October something, not that long from now. I'll find the date in a second, but basically, for your next meeting. If we are going to have a public comment period, even though this is not formal rulemaking, but if we are going to provide a greater opportunity than just during the meetings for the public to weigh in and still have you have time to react to those comments, if any come in, right after the November 4th meeting is when to do that. So we've got the rest of this meeting and next meeting to try to work our way through all of the recommendations, redraft them, and then immediately get them out the day after your next meeting for a 2-week comment period, which is not long, but it's better than no time. What that will mean is that when I send the meeting packet out for your November 20th meeting, 10 days in advance, it comes out November 10th, we won't have the public comments back by then. So what you will have is then a report out, or maybe a handout on the day of your November 20th meeting, or a report out by me on here's the essence of what was said and here are all the comments for you to digest. That's not ideal, but I don't see a way around it, given the timeline that we've been provided by the legislature. And for good reason, I understand why we were provided that timeline. So then you'll have the opportunity to think about that and talk about that on November 20th. And you'll have one final time on December 12th, to sort of be and I will redraft the recommendations after the November 20th meeting. And your final sign off is December 12th. You can make changes at December 12th meeting. I will incorporate them to the best of my ability, and then it will go to the legislature. So you'll just have to have faith from December 12th on that we've gotten it, that you're far enough along in clarifying the changes that you make. So that's the timeline. And then we will get it in before the end of the year. In hopes that it speeds up, legislative action on some of these items. So I want to at a minimum get through the next 3 recommendations, resource database, farmer learning networks, and the area law today. If we can get further than that, it would be even better, because that would be a lot of re-editing in a 24-hour period after you don't touch on it at all. So that's the goal here. Any questions about process? Nope. Okay. All right, then let's jump into the resource database. Comments on that one? See one thumbs up, 2 thumbs up. Yep, Julie Marie?
I had a couple of questions that I think we need to maybe resolve here. Who exactly are we looking at that would direct this effort of creating this database? And there's really 2 parts. There's the initial data collection, then there's also maintenance of it, as well as, and then we can have multiple access points for people to tap in. But it's also, if we create it and never update it, then it has a limited shelf life. But so basically, who would direct this effort? Who would own execution of this? Really needs to be fleshed out in here. There have been efforts in the past at UMaine, and I forget the name of it because it's a long time ago. There was like a Center for Ag effort to try to do exactly this, and it never quite got off the ground. So, knowing that it needs to have not just one-time support, but it needs to have, consistent, keep the deadlines in there to keep it going.
Sure. Yep, thank you.
It sounds like an intern project at Farm Credit Research. It's great when it happens.
Well, maybe, but then something's gonna take over time.
So, I agree 100%. I'm gonna sound like a broken record, right? I think we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We have a couple of these that are well started, or like the Beginning Farm Resource Network is good and has been kept up. I think their funding ended just recently, so this would be well timed if they got the money to continue with that, and maybe they make a button so it sorts it for dairy, you know, versus beginning farm stuff that has some stuff that certainly is applicable to dairy, but not all of it, you know. But again, let's not reinvent the wheel, because trying to make a new yellow pages all over again is like, we've got some stuff we could use if we just.
Other reactions to this, I'll play devil's advocate for a moment on that one. If I'm understanding that resource network, it's focused exclusively on beginning.
That's correct.
Yeah, so giving them money to expand their purview to the dairy industry, irrespective of whether they're new farmers or not. Not quite sure how that works, but the other entity identified was the Maine Farmer Resource Network. I think part of the conversation as well was, but I can't defend it, is that the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center is not close enough to the, like, maybe it's a question for all of you. Why isn't that resource good enough?
Not Maine specific.
Yeah, it's mostly federal programs.
Yeah.
Or it's targeted to New York and some.
A few.
It includes those states in their state programs, but not a lot from us.
Just in case there's confusion, the Maine Farmer Resource Network is the former. Big
Former
Farm
Big
Farmer
Farm.
Resource
That's correct.
Network. It's just-
Okay, got
yes, it's been rebranded to serve not just the.
Okay, so, and that's
Grant money
specifically
that's-
referenced,
I think, right.
and that's specifically referenced in the draft
Yes.
recommendation. So in light of that, are there major changes to be made to this one? Do you want it remaining in here? Keep it in, Bill?
I want to see it remain in, but I want the focus to be very specific about what we're looking for to come out of this recommendation. Right now, it's a laundry list of just about everything. And it overlaps with the technical services recommendations right now.
It's like a list of the technical services, and before we said we wanted to fund the technical services, right?
Yep.
Do we even need it?
If it's one or the other, I don't care.
I don't know, I
As long
think
as
the
it's-
technical part of it pretty much covers what the resource database is,
Julie Marie and then Marion?
What we're really talking about is talking about an online platform somewhere where you can basically search and say, you're looking for info on value-added processing, or you're looking for, info on some subset of dairy in these categories, and you're just kind of scanning through to look. It's not, this isn't a huge lift, but it does need some effort, it does need some attention, and like I say, it does need continued monitoring to make sure it's up to date. And so I don't know if that we have something in one of our state programs somewhere that already has part of this. Links are wonderful things. You don't have to recreate the wheel of all the details of the program. You just need to sort of make it a category so it can be searchable, and here's a link. So.
Yep. Miriam and then Annie?
I think the couple benefits that we discussed about this database as well. That one is that it will actually improve the technical assistance you receive, because service providers cannot remember all of this. Like it's actually going to be a resource for service providers as much as it is also a resource for farmers. I can guarantee you that. And I think we listed some of the technical assistance types in there, because one thing we had talked about is if you are looking to get, let's say, succession planning or business planning with a dairy specific focus, finding even a private consultant to pay who has experience in specifically dairy can be a real challenge. So having those names in a database so you can know who do I contact. Well, if maybe I get a Farm for the Future grant and I want to use it with one of these service providers, who am I looking for help them?
My comment was gonna be something similar, that I think this recommendation came out more from a group of service providers than it did like from, it wasn't as farmer led as it was service provider led. That I think it would be more beneficial to service providers saying, here, we can access this database to say this is where we can find all these very specific people to recommend, as opposed to farmers actually looking, because farmers, I mean, we use all sorts of links and Google and we've got all sorts of ways of finding information out, so I think and I mean, personally, I think farmers would rather have like if we're prioritizing, I think we'd rather have an actual technical service provider than a database.
And I tried, I tried to make a guess as to what you thought the order of priority should be relative to recommendations, and they are in that order. And so if there's something lower down in this document that you feel should be elevated, let's flag that, because otherwise, that was my assumption, was that this kind of was in the order. All right, I'm not sure we need a lot more on this resource database. I'm hearing that we keep it. If there's a way that we could be more specific about outcomes, let's give that a try. Main Farmer Resource Network is already referenced, and so I think we move on. Okay. Farmer Learning Networks, reaction to that one?
My thought would be that it's much needed. How do we facilitate that? Question, that might be to incentivize an organization that's already working, whether that be university or whether that be actually MDIA. Somebody could, if we had a little, it wouldn't even take much to incentivize us to do that for the dairy farms. And it's kind of it's kind of already in our mission with MDIA to do that, but maybe to help us along a little bit. That's just a thought. But.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, like the main organizers, like we do picnics and we're doing it at a different farm, 2 times a year. And it's like the same sort of, yeah. Institutionalize or not institutionalize, some sort of funding, to help.
Have it bolstered that a little bit to get a different speaker or
Yeah,
somebody come away or whatever, right?
Yeah, or yeah.
Underwriting.
Yeah.
So I'll be completely candid, as I was drafting it, I did, I was reading a whole bunch of notes from all the various meetings. And I noted that there was a suggestion to compensate participants for their time. And it raised an eyebrow for me, not because we don't all want to be compensated for our time for learning, but I just thought that it was going to be hard to defend. And so I'm just questioning whether you want to keep that in there.
I think that we could be more specific about it, but what I personally would love to see is the farmers who are providing mentorship get compensated for their time when they are providing a service to other farmers. And we've asked a lot often of, especially a couple farmers who have a lot of wisdom to share, and that ends up becoming a significant portion of their time because they say yes once and boy, the service provider is gonna come back. And I just think that it's important that people get compensated for that time because it is fair and because of.
Got it. Okay, I can alter it.
Question, I'm asking a question of the farmers who have been involved in these. Is it normally in-state farmers that are providing the expertise? Or is it most of the time you're bringing somebody in from outside the state, who maybe has an example? Or is it a blend of both? I mean, what? Because I think it's, to Jody's point, I think it's might be easier to defend a funding stream if it's, we're bringing in outside experience, more as an educator.
Depends, I mean, plenty of times there are like pasture walks hosted at farms. It takes a lot of time out of that farmer's time to go like show all your land, or like hosting a, group from the university to come to your farm, or like there's various different things that happen and you're, sharing your knowledge.
All right.
So it's not always like you go and speak at an event and we bring in a farmer. That does happen too, but.
Okay, I can tweak that and do that. All right, anything else on that? Let's move on. Dairy bond. So I'll just put as an aside here that once I finished doing the first draft of all of these recommendations, I sat with them and I was thinking, if we're not way more specific on how these would get funded, then they're not going to be received well by the legislature, which got me thinking about, do we need some kind of a subgroup that involves, for one meeting between now and the next meeting, that could invite others who have expertise in innovative financing mechanisms. And I'll just leave it at that. And where I think some knowledge is in this room, no doubt, but not all of you would probably say that that is either your area of expertise or your interest, frankly. So we have talked about funding mechanisms already today and have kind of modified some of the recommendations to reflect those conversations. Now we're at, the big gorilla here, which is the dairy bond. And I think there are potentially other financing ideas that I'm no expert in myself. So it does raise the question for me as to whether, happy to have some conversation about this now, but whether you would be open to us as a department trying to pull together a bunch of minds, taking a look at a slightly redrafted set of recommendations that reflects today's conversation and just say, what do you think? And so that we have a little bit more information to bring back to you. And if anybody in the room is wanting to participate in that, you're welcome to, but just a way to expand the brain trust on this name.
I think if we do move forward with that, I see Representative Booker is still on as one person that we should try to encourage to join.
It's on my list.
So you're saying that you would like, you're,
Oh, sorry, yeah, the representative, since we put you on the spot.
Hi. Sorry, I've been listening in and out all day long. Appreciate everything that's going on. And yeah, I've been a big advocate for the bond for a while now, and would love to hear more about that and about how we can move that forward, and happy to collaborate in any way I can with you on it.
Great, that'd be great, thank you.
so I mean, my initial thought when I saw the bond was we would use that, and I went back, to like technical service providers, but you're thinking maybe any of it or all of it, it might be what comes out of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would make sense to be talking about bond, but also, just having input as somebody reads the full suite of recommendations. On the tier program, we've talked about the number of possibilities, what are the mechanics of doing that? Preliminary and then.
I just have one kind of note of guidance. So we have had bonds in the past that has set aside funds for agriculture, maybe not dairy specifically, but I'm thinking of the NPI, Maine Technology. That's got a subset of money that's always set aside for agriculture and rarely tapped, because the way the rules are written on it just don't mesh. They mesh better for widgets and electro type technology than they do for farm, boots on the ground technology. And so I know with the new AFFIF program, that's still new and there's still shaping going on with that. So my comment would be just we need to be careful how we direct the money and make sure that, we allow that applicability to what we're trying to help with. But we may already have tools in place that we can use to build this.
Yeah, no, that's great. As I was trying to come up with a theoretical list, if you all were supportive of it, I did not think of MTI, and I'll make sure that I add that.
Just to go right along with what you were saying, Julie Marie, I was a little disappointed to not see the Dairy Improvement Fund mentioned in their things, and I think that's the obvious place to put it. I feel like that started to get a little momentum and had some more stuff, and I just feel like it took people a little bit to get comfortable with how the process worked and now they're like, oh, I can use that, that works good. And if we do a new program, it's gonna be 3 to 5 years before everybody gets comfortable with it again and understands exactly how to do it.
So are you suggesting that specific reference to DIF be in this dairy bond?
Yeah, maybe.
recommendation?
I mean, if you did a dairy bond and dumped $20 million into DIF, great. But I'm just saying that structure is there. It seems like it's working pretty well. We've talked about a few other tweaks to it. Maybe it should be doubled, maybe it should be forgivable, maybe student loans, whatever, but yeah. It's
Yeah.
already there.
And I would strongly recommend if that's the avenue to go, that we look at it to assess it, to tweak.
Yeah, sure.
I know one of the challenges has been that half of the process is in DACF, the other half of the process is in Fane, and Fane doesn't always understand what's going on in the ag world, and they tend to be the source of a lot of the stress in that.
And I feel that's part of what I'm like, we got back to, just to use a specific example, we've gotten back to talking about service providers and so forth. I've gotten pretty comfortable with that with a couple of different loan officers at Farm Credit, and we know how to work through it now. And I don't mean manipulate it, I just mean, oh, okay, that's a problem, we need to talk to this person, that's a problem, we need to talk to this person. If we get this, they don't ask that question to begin with, those kind of things. And I'm not sure that Extension should do that or wants to do that or could, but it wouldn't be hard for them. And there could be other banks that are, there are other agricultural banks around that once they learn how to do that, they will work with anybody. It's just, we work with them a lot.
Okay, I think, Bill, and then I'm gonna wrap this one up with a thought. Go ahead.
Okay. To me, a bond has a requirement of repayment. It's not free money. So whatever bond is issued, how is it going to be paid back? If you issued a bond and the interest rate was 6%, then somebody's going to be paying 6%. And who is that somebody? Is that the beneficiary of the money that's put out? So you're just having a transfer of a debt to the person?
I understood what was being discussed was main taxpayers in the same bonding mechanism that you see on the ballot almost every election.
Yeah, but one of the things that they always say is, this will be paid back at over this many years, and therefore this is the obligation for the
Right,
state.
yeah, which is different than who pays it. Who pays it are main taxpayers writ large. Yeah. Okay. All right, so I don't know in what form this particular one will come back to you in, because I think it will be reflected in whether we can pull together a group to talk about funding sources in general, whether that happens before the next meeting, which I hope it will. But so don't be surprised, I guess I should just say, don't be surprised if you may see a number of new ideas around the whole financing piece, whether they're embedded in particular recommendations or they're a standalone, but.
That's good.
Yeah, okay. All right, so then let's flip the page to page 6, and these 3 at the top were ideas that didn't necessarily come out of specific subgroups, but that you talked about in one of your first 2 meetings or 3 meetings. So reactions to the first one, and I will say, I was winging it a little bit on the second half around how you. I was hearing you like the idea of integrating a cost of production study with an economic impact study in some manner, but I'm not sure I fully captured where you were.
I think the idea of merging the two, makes a messy process messier. Not that when you're doing an economic impact study, obviously you're going to build off of some of the same categories and things from the cost of production study. But it's, it's much bigger than that. It's, you're pulling, you want the impact of what's the in-state processing, what's the in-state retail, what's the agri-services, I mean, it's the cost of production is just a small piece of it. So, I really think they need to be thought of as separate research opportunities. Just one might fuel the other, the data for the other.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
We are actively looking into doing an economic impact study.
And we,
I just had one thing too. It is totally two different things, because I think the cost of production study that shows the need for the dairy, and the economic impact study would show the value to the state and people.
so then maybe what I was hearing, and if you just want to jettison this entirely, that's fine. That it seemed like you were pointing out earlier the inefficiency data. That you were making farmers jump through the same sorts of overlapping hoops when you needed the same information or some of the same information for both efforts. And so what I was trying to get at was how to better integrate or combine the data collection process in a new way, but I don't know if it makes sense.
I don't think there's much collection for the impact study that needs to be done at the farm level. That's, I think, where we were going with the cost production study was how to streamline that so that we get, consistent information year after year and better participation.
Especially for tier 1 farms.
My only comment quick on the economic impact study was, I thought maybe it should be specific. Sometimes we hear people argue about like, oh yeah, okay, but that research was done by that industry, so of course it came out that way. Like, should we say that it needs to be like a third party or university or something like that? That was what just ran through my mind.
Technically, university, they don't have capacity, they're putting me in touch with other consultants who might. So it won't be us doing it.
Well, I
It'll
just,
be me doing the research, but
Yeah, you can do it. Just
it
put
would
it
be
in.
a third party, but we're hoping to get
My
some.
report will be like, it's really good.
We're hoping to get support from other.
well, I just mean follow the money stuff too. Like, maybe it's important that the state funds this so that it's not like, oh, the dairy farmers got together and paid for this study.
The only challenge there is that,
It doesn't matter. It would have been the same people that performed it.
agreed, but the only challenge there is that the funding mechanism is very slow, and so.
How long do we
Okay,
this?
well then, so is the recommendation just about the economic impact study then? And not about, should I be getting rid of any reference to the cost of production study? Or do you want to say something about that study, have it be a separate point? I mean, obviously, it sounds like you're trying to figure out ways to get greater participation in the cost of production study. That's a separate thing. Is that something that the legislature can help with and that you want in a report? Or is it predominantly that you're looking for funding to support an economic impact?
I think the latter. I think we can work through the first with
Okay.
the commission.
But though I will have to say, if we're gonna do anything, funding would really aid that process. Because that's something that the Milk Commission's bumping up against regularly. So, if there's a way to encourage a consistent stream of funding to underwrite this, that's a good thing.
Julie, you had mentioned before that the person who has been doing this forever is now not forever.
Yeah, so, you know, especially funding for the next one, because, you know, they go out, it's an RFP process. We put it out, and who knows, we could have somebody from Maine who is knowledgeable, who would take on the contract. Or we can have somebody from out of state who knows no one. And I have no way to predict what the cost scale is gonna be. I mean, we've been very fortunate up till now that we've had really great people who are knowledgeable and are known in state and who are willing to do it for cheap.
Okay, so I can either just cut out the second half of this recommendation, focus exclusively on an economic impact study, or have a second recommendation that does talk about the need for consistent funding for cost of production.
I just want to say in the room, that the department recognizes the need for this kind of capacity kind of broadly. So if this, just to alert people that if this recommendation makes it into the report, the response may be, or the mechanism to move it forward may end up being some kind of departmental capacity that is not strictly dairy. So I just wanted to say that out loud here.
Economic impact study,
Yeah.
not cost of production. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask what capacity to do what, or like, what are the bounds of that discussion?
What are you doing tomorrow?
To understand the economic impact of agriculture generally.
Yes, with each subsection identified within the context.
Okay. Let's move on then to compound processing capacity. You know, it was getting at the animated conversation that we had earlier around, is it, you know, does it make more sense to expand existing capacity for processing? For instance, on farms, and if that was an interest area of the group, then you need to understand more thoroughly, I think, who's doing the processing, what are their constraints, what are their interests, and so on. So that was an early on conversation that you were having, probably in meeting number 2. What was your reaction to that?
My feeling was that the last sentence was critical.
Keep this in for now.
I like the last sentence, okay, but I don't think we should develop a new one. I think it should be funneled through DIF or a match to Northeast Area Business Innovation Center programs or something like that. I know I keep saying that over and over.
Okay, either develop or expand.
Yeah, expand or improve, I'm talking about that.
Fine.
Sorry, where are we? Oh, sorry.
Expand and existing.
Maybe
Yeah.
I'm not wholesale against doing anything new. I don't mean that at all. I mean, it seems like that would probably would work with the programs that we already have.
Is that the program that makes, are you wanting to name a program specifically?
Well, there's one concern I would have with using DIF as a funding mechanism. I mean, we do know a lot of cheesemakers who purchase milk from dairy farms but don't milk their own animals,
Okay.
so they can't get funds from DIF.
That's a good point.
So does an existing funding instrument exist that meets the needs?
There's some programs through Northeast Area Business Innovation Center, but those tend to be natural federal programs. I don't know that this is even possible, but if we said, hey, we would double the amount, or we could get you boosted up on it, or if you were second place on that, you get it from Maine, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
So I'm hearing expand or develop if necessary. Sounds like it may not exist.
Go to that.
It may be a matching system that you could tap into, whether it's Dairy Business Innovation or you get some other federal grant that meets these criteria, then the state of Maine has pot of money that could help provide some matching funds, which are always required in those bigger ones
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, I like that idea just fine. That's simple, right? Like, hey, if you got that grant, we know it's a good enough project, so we'll give you some money too. But if you don't quite get that grant and you could have, and it made sense to us, that doesn't fix that part, you know what I mean?
All right, I'm gonna tweak this one and bring it back. and
Okay, you're right.
talk
I didn't
about it
think of that.
again. The last
So you
one
have to
here,
back up.
interstate dairy product sales, thoughts on that? That was an early on conversation.
That's
We were-
low hanging fruit.
Was that an Andy, was that something Andy was?
Yeah, Andy raised it.
Just don't remember exactly.
And it was. Yeah, can you speak to that at all?
It's just, I think the challenge of getting your products out of state is it's a barrier that. It's like, well, you just have to jump through, and nobody really doesn't understand what these necessarily are.
Can speak to that.
Yeah.
It's, I mean. We've checked the boxes that we think we need to check,
You don't necessarily.
but. I'm really comfortable that I checked all the boxes that are there, and it's hard to know.
Let me leave that one in for now, and we can always, we have other opportunities to get rid of it, if we want to. Okay, so before I let you go, could you just look at the last 5 bullets and just call out whether any of these things are things that you're wanting to talk about at a future meeting?
Suggest that the third bullet about workforce development, that we at least reference. There's an effort that the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center is doing directed towards dairy workforce as and we also have the MDIA supported project at Eastern Maine Development Corporation that is targeted to dairy workforce. So at least putting them on the radar.
There's another workforce development in Maine as well that's going on, that's not farm specific, but.
Okay, and so maybe it's worth, that's, if dairy can patch into that, then that's worth mentioning. So at least those are raised in profile.
Sure. Any others that you want to talk about at future meetings?
Yeah, I wanna have at least a bullet about organic feed.
Which is not on here, right?
All right, Annie?
Yeah. No, please.
Should I then, when you see this next, you don't want to see the other 4 separate recommendations about incentivizing buyers and sellers for farm transfer, humane food testing program.
I think that anything that we present as final recommendations are gonna require salesmanship with the legislature, et cetera. It's various publics.
Yeah, I wanted to flag it, but it's not something that I assumed you'd want in the report. Ethan, then.
Sorry, I just put, the very first one there, separate recommendation for funding buyer and seller. I said, I like this, either low interest or some kind of match funding or guarantees. I mentioned that before, like loan guarantees. We work with FAME, Farm Credit East works with FAME and with FSA lots of times. If the loan isn't quite meeting underwriting, but it gets guaranteed, we can do it sometimes. So if we somehow set it up through FAME, a loan guarantee that like, okay, Sam's buying it from dad and we could get a guarantee, then dad knows he can retire. Hopefully he knows that his son's gonna be successful so that he can retire, but in the case he doesn't, there'd be a guarantee. I thought that was good. And then I had a note on the workforce development.
All
I
right,
can see
we'll
that.
get that from you. We're gonna get notes from.
This one, that first one that, speaking of what Ethan just said, wouldn't necessarily have to be dairy specific,
That's true.
that would really appeal to ag in general.
Got it. Okay, all right, we're a minute over. I always promise to end on time, so I'm sorry. And I think punchline is, we may reach out to a couple of you about finance stuff. We'll Bill and Julie Marie will be getting together. Thank you. Your next meeting, Monday, November 4th, here, same time period. And we'll have a meeting packet, and hopefully doing ready for your bills, edification, on 24th. You out on Monday. Yeah, if you could get it. Great.
I wanna also channel my inner Jewish mother and encourage people to take food with them if you haven't eaten. There's no point in us taking it back to Daring, so please take it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, really excited.
Thanks, Jody.
Of course.